long time ago, found out that we were expecting a baby. It seemed like 9 months was just an incredibly long time. Couldn't imagine that we could wait all that time for the baby to be born. It was like waiting an entire school year for summer break to come. But then as we got into it, we found out that there were doctor visits. There were supplies to buy to get ready. There was this natural childbirth class that we had to go to. I'm not sure what would have happened if we hadn't gone. I'm thinking we would have still had the baby. And with that class, the high point of that class turned out to be a film strip on the birth process. So you younger people, you can ask your grandparents what film strips were. So the high point of that class was always going to Baker Square afterwards, getting lunch. But somehow we got to the end of that endless 9 months, and the baby's room wasn't done yet, and Rachel, who was, I think at that point, 13 months pregnant, she was up there painting because she knew I couldn't be trusted to do it. She had seen me paint. It wasn't pretty. And I said we got to the end of that time, but we didn't quite make it. Actually, there was an emergency, and it didn't end the way we thought it would, but there was a C-section, and everything turned out okay. It wasn't what we expected it to be. And 9 years later, it was a similar story when we adopted our son, because there was this, seemed like an endless time stretched out ahead of us. And we couldn't imagine waiting all that time, but then there were all these hoops that we had to jump through. There was getting our passports, filling out reams of paperwork, and sometimes we had to duplicate forms just because the Russian government came back and said, oh, you have to do these again. We'd ask why, and they said, just do it. And we had to buy supplies, and we had to get the room ready. We also had to collect and buy donated medicine and other necessities to take to the orphanage and transmit on. But then all it seemed again, all of a sudden, that day came when we were walking through the doors of the orphanage. We were there. I'm thinking parents have had most parents have had similar experiences. Something seems so far off, and all of a sudden it's there. David Lowe's was the president of the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. He would call those kinds of experiences active waiting. He says there are two types of waiting. There's active waiting and there's passive waiting. Passive waiting is when you're more or less sitting on your hands waiting for something to happen. Kind of like sitting in class at school waiting for the bell to ring. But active waiting occurs when you use that period to prepare for the thing that you're waiting for. And for us as faithful Christians, David Lowe's believes that Advent should be a time of active waiting. And it's not active because we're out buying presents or we're checking names off our Christmas list or planning our parties or our family dinners. It should be active because we're preparing ourselves. We're preparing ourselves anew for the coming of Christ in our lives. We use the Old Testament scriptures, some of them anyway, as our readings for Advent, and there's a reason for that. It's because they actually point to what Advent should be. If you go back to the reading from Isaiah, there's a hint there. Isaiah was an active prophet in the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC, and he was one of those prophets who was selected by God during the time after the kingdom had split apart into Israel and Judah, and Isaiah's job was to speak truth to power. His job was to tell the ruler of Judah when they were going wrong, and it was also to tell the people when they were being unfaithful. And he did that a lot, because things were pretty messed up. And he also prophesied. He looked ahead and he predicted a time when devastation would come. About a century later, the Babylonians invaded and they utterly destroyed the temple and they burned Jerusalem and they took thousands upon thousands of Israelites back to Babylon for the captivity. But just as importantly, Isaiah looked ahead and he foretold a time of restitution. As he said, when the mountains would be leveled and the valleys raised to make a highway for the people to return. This would be God leading his people back to the promised land after they have paid their price. And the time of that return was about 150 years in Isaiah's future. He saw it. And he also saw something else. He saw that people would continue to separate themselves from God. So he looked even further into the future. And he looked to a time, he predicted a time when a Messiah, a Savior, would come and lead the people back into relationship with their God once and for all. Isaiah spoke about his voice in the wilderness. It was an angelic voice that cried out, "Prepare the way of the Lord." And the Hebrew word that we translate as prepare, the Hebrew word is panah. And it means more than just prepare. It means clearing the way. It means sweeping away obstacles. So Isaiah is telling us about Israel's return from exile. He's also telling us about Israel, or about humanity's return to God. And this is a chance for us to prepare, to sweep away the obstacles. It's not a time of passive waiting. Advent's not a countdown. It's not just an excuse to sing Christmas songs and make our lists and check them twice. It's a season when we're given a chance once again to clear the way in our lives for the coming of Jesus. It's a chance to look at our own lives and consider if our own hearts are ready to receive Him. It's a chance to reflect on what we've done that makes it necessary for Jesus to come in the first place. And it's also a time when we should be getting, as Isaiah said, to that mountaintop and shouting the good news, sharing the good news of salvation with everyone who's in earshot. Advent is a time of active waiting for us. It's a time of getting ready for the arrival of Jesus and getting ready to welcome Him again into our hearts and into our lives. And it's about clearing away the obstacles that get in the way of welcoming Him. It's about clearing away the obstacles that keep us from embracing the hope and the promise and the reality of salvation through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So this season, let's remember, let's remind each other that it's not about the parties, it's not about the Christmas shopping, it's not about Walmart and 1,001 other distractions that are out there. It's about looking inside, clearing away those things that pull us away from who we are and what we should be, getting ready to welcome Jesus. And it's about getting up to a mountaintop and proclaiming the good news that Jesus Christ is sent by God to save us from our sin.